Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest Cheryl Bostrom, who's here to share with us her 3 award-winning books, Sugarbirds, Leaning on Air, and What the River Keeps. So what happens when the wild beauty of the Pacific Northwest becomes a character all of its own? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. A keen student of the natural world and the workings of the human heart, Pacific Northwest author Cheryl Grey Bostrom captures the mystery and wonder of both in her lyrical, surprising fictions. So welcome to the show, Cheryl Grey Bostrom.
Thanks, Marianne. So good to be here.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about these books. And by the way, congratulations, not just on the Nautilus Book Award, but also I understand you have just a glowing Kirkus review that was done for What the River Keeps. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Well, What the River Keeps is another one of my nature novels set in the Pacific Northwest, and they're all women's fiction. But it was a great delight to me when Kirkus awarded the novel What the River Keeps a starred review, and then they chose it as one of 2 novels on their Best Indie Books of June list. So I was pretty thrilled.
Congratulations, by the way, because what a big accomplishment that is. I know they get so many submissions. Why don't we start off at the beginning? Why don't we start with Sugarbirds?
Sure. Well, when my first granddaughter was born, I shifted from writing nonfiction to fiction, and so I had a lot to learn. So I took a couple of classes and then just wrote and wrote. But I ended up with a sketch about a girl and fire, and Sugarbirds emerged out of that, and it eventually became a Book of the Year, won over a dozen awards. But I think it resonated with people because it's a story about a 10-year-old girl who accidentally lights a fire, and she believes that she has burned, she does burn down her house, and she believes that she has killed her parents. And so, lost in this emotional wilderness of grief and shame, she runs into the forest, to this Pacific Northwest forest on a riparian corridor, and hides for a month. Now, her parents have taught her a lot about the natural world, and surprisingly, she is able to survive. And when you read about her, you'll realize it's not such a surprise. But as she interacts with the natural world, which is a huge character, a big player in all of my books, she is brought home by the care and the healing that she sees in the natural world, and by the love of the people who are hunting for her. And so that's the first book.
What a great book. And I understand that Leaning on Air kind of picks up where Sugarbirds left off. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. 2 characters in Sugarbirds were Celia and Burnaby, and they were both part of the search for young Aggie when she's in the woods. But Burnaby is autistic, and Leaning on Air picks up 12 years after Sugarbirds ends. And at this point, Burnaby is an equine surgeon who has learned to mitigate some of his autistic symptoms through a variety of mechanisms, but he doesn't want to not be autistic. He has a fascinating worldview that I wanted readers to see through his eyes as an autistic man, that there's really a beautiful element to a brain like this. And people have equated this book with, say, a synthesis of A Beautiful Mind and The Notebook, because it's a most unusual love story. As Burnaby reunites with Celia, they launch into this whirlwind marriage, but they're so different. And she is an ornithologist who's really been adrift and has floated from guy to guy. And she doesn't understand how Burnaby can interpret the spiritual world through the eyes of quantum physics, or how he interprets nearness to God and the power of prayer through actual physical scientific principles in quantum physics. And so as they launch into this life together, they're trying to have a family. She experiences miscarriages, repeated miscarriages, and she's approaching 40. She's hiking to the nest of a research hawk when she loses another baby. And that's the inciting incident in the story. And it drives her into this remote region of the Pacific Northwest called the Palouse. And it's a vast area with only 1% of the native prairie remaining. It's on the breaks of the Snake River. It's wheat country. But with this wild prairie, she discovers in herself her own inner area to be restored and to be preserved. And so the story dovetails with the restoration of land and the restoration of this marriage, as Celia has believed that Burnaby can't understand the choices that she made that initiated this early loss of a child. And I think it's a story that immerses readers in hope, in the possibility of healing and restoration, not only for land, but also for themselves. And as they watch this marriage unfold, even though it's a very unusual love story, they're able to, I keep hearing from readers that they're able to learn about their own marriages and their own relationships and how we really need to learn to one another in our relationships, to treat each other as if we needed the other to feed us because we don't have elbows. And the interdependence that land and nature and human relationship has, and really what love looks like in the midst of all that. That's a pretty big nutshell, but it gives you the gist, I hope.
It sure does. It sure does. And of course, we're not going into very many spoilers here. There's so much more to these books, and I'd love for you to dive into What the River Keeps.
Okay, What the River Keeps is a completely new set of characters, and it's set in the area where I grew up. And that's on the Olympic Peninsula in Northwest Washington State. And the Elwha River was an area that 85% of this 45-mile river is in Olympic National Park. In the early 1900s, an entrepreneur dammed that river 5 miles from its mouth, and it blocked magnificent fish runs, devastated the tribe that lived there, and it took 100 years and an act of Congress before those dams were able to come down. And so I have a fisheries biologist return to the Elwha River, which is where she grew up, at a little fishing resort there on the reservoir called Lake Aldwell. And she's returning to help restore this river as these dams come down. She's given a plum job as a lead fisheries biologist. But when she returns home, shadows, dark spirits that haunted her when she was there and that had really led her to a confused childhood resurface. And she meets a guy and begins to untangle her mysterious past. And as the river heals and as the river finds its true course, there are areas of her life that are exposed too that readers won't see coming. And I'm really having fun talking to early readers and reviewers because they're pretty astonished by where this story goes. So it's a lot of fun, but it's a layered story about, again, as our themes in all my stories, about restoration of the land, restoration of hearts. And I found, as I researched the book, that the tribe that was so affected by the damming, the tourniquets that choked the ecosystem on this river, that tribe was led by people who were very prayerful and very patient and very persistent. And even though the tribe suffered immensely while the rest of the Olympic Peninsula sprang into prosperity because of the hydroelectricity from these dams, this tribe endured pretty much the loss of their cultural areas, their fish, their tribal ecosystem that had sustained them since, as they put it, time immemorial. And so watching this tribe heal as the river heals and as my biologist heals too is really pretty wonderful. And it's all historically founded. I did a lot of research with biologists and ecologists who worked on the project. And then because it was the largest, at the time, the largest dam restoration in the world at that time, there was a ton of information. And so I had a lot of fun digging through that and then creating this very emotional, engaging story in the midst of it.
Well, nature takes center stage in your book, especially the Pacific Northwest. Why is there such an emphasis on the natural world in your book?
Well, I'm a follower of Christ, and I believe that nature is God's first book, and that through it we can, as we study the natural world, and I do that through my photography and just by being outside all the time, and I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian who's always lived in these rural and wild areas. But as I study the natural world, I learn a lot about the character of God and about the nature of human relationships and the nature of our connection to the natural world. So, in a similar way as, say, the book The Overstory, where trees are interwoven into all of the players' lives in this book, the natural world is a dynamic character in my stories. And characters may not always even realize the impact that nature is having on them, but as they interact with nature, it really teaches them and informs them, and it also engages the unseen world. And if we think of ourselves as emotional, physical, and spiritual beings, nature is one of the best ways to express and interact with that spiritual element in our lives. I'm a writer who writes from a position and a worldview of hope and very deep faith that all things will be made new at one point. But my books are for those who just want to engage the discussion, who want to consider the spiritual world and how they connect with that in their own lives. And we're all going to worship something. We all have belief systems that shape our choices and our worldviews. And so my books give an opportunity through nature and these characters for readers of any persuasion to engage and consider what brings them hope, what brings them restoration, how can they find purpose and place in the world. And they can feel free to agree or disagree with it, but it sure makes for rich discussion.
I'd like to touch on the autistic character, Burnaby, in Sugarbirds, and then
Mhm.
again in your Nautilus Award-winning book, Leaning on Air. Why was his autism so important to your story?
Well, first, we have a very significant population who are experiencing autism in their families or personally. And I don't like to see people labeled and limited by a diagnosis. Instead, to talk about autism through this very full dimensioned character, Burnaby, a lot of readers gained a tremendous amount of hope through his life and through what he went through. They also felt heard and understood as they met him and grew to love him. And I wanted a character who was beloved not in spite of his autism, but because of it. And I think it's pretty normal for people, and normal is a relative term, of course, but to think that the autistic person is the person who needs to change. Sure, there are some symptoms that can be mitigated that can create problems for somebody who's autistic, but the way that autistic individuals can see the world can be a very great gift to us. And maybe it's us who need to reconsider our worldviews and not try to change those whose views are different than ours. And Burnaby does that so beautifully. He's very linear and sees the world in pretty black and white terms. But as one autism expert whom I worked with on this novel said, well, if you've known one autistic person, you've known one autistic person. I'm not typing him, and I'm not lumping all people who are on the spectrum into one mode of operation. But because Burnaby is so touch sensitive, because he marries this passionate woman who really is very touchy, they have to figure out what love looks like in their relationship, where he can't be surprised by touch. And so for her to love him, she can't be touching him in offhanded ways. And she has her needs as well. And so the story is this dance between them with this unique autistic perspective and her more neurotypical perspective. And it's really fascinating because any of us who've been married for a long period of time or been in a relationship for a long period of time will recognize in them the long journey to understanding one another and meeting each other's needs. And so he was ideal for that. Plus, I love science. I love the natural world, and Burnaby and Celia, both as scientists, fit the bill for that as well.
I really love how healing the land and hearts seems to be this recurring theme in your stories. Can you share on that for us?
I think we're created to heal. If a tree takes a chop to the side of it, the bark will roll over it over the next few years and heal that bark. If you have a tree that is afflicted by insects or disease, they'll send messages through the mycorrhizae in their root systems to caution the trees in the vicinity and have them alter their chemical structures to resist. My granddad was an Alaska pioneer, and when the Exxon Valdez had that tremendous oil spill, I was just bereft. I saw, that 250,000 birds had been killed. All this wildlife had been decimated. And I just thought that magnificent ecosystem in Alaska there was never going to be the same. But my granddad, who'd been through World War II and who had watched spills like this, not of this magnitude, but in Alaska, just looked at me. And although he didn't understand the biology of it all, he said, "It'll heal, Cheryl." And I looked at him with, askance. And he said, "No, it will. It's made to heal." He didn't understand anything about naturally occurring by oil-eating bacteria or any of the other mechanisms that would heal this land, but it did. And there are just endless illustrations of that. And so in Sugarbirds and in all of these stories, Leaning on Air, What the River Keeps, there's a healing that happens when strongholds are removed, whether they're dams or emotional strongholds. The river heals, the human psyche heals. In Leaning on Air, when the land is farmed appropriately or after a wildfire, the land recovers. To me, that's just thrilling, and it immerses me in hope, and I want it to do the same for my readers.
Well, Cheryl, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Well, I would love them to come on over to CherylBostrom.com. That's CherylBostrom.com. And you can write to me there, and I always respond. So I would love to correspond with you. I also have a Substack that's got a lot of my photography and musings and writerly updates. And I do a lot of giveaways, book giveaways. And that's at CherylGrayBostrom.substack.com. And I'm on socials as well.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for your interest in my books. I hope that they capture you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your award-winning novels, Sugarbirds, Leaning on Air, and What the River Keeps. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.